Ever wondered how investigative genetic genealogy cracked one of the most chilling college murder cases in recent history? Let's talk about the 2022 University of Idaho student murders.
Hey, I'm Leah, feeling curious today and ready to dig into a case that's complex, heartbreaking, and honestly, really important to understand.
And I'm Garrett, also here and ready to explore this gripping story with you on Laid Back Learning with Leah and Garrett. Today, we're covering the 2022 University of Idaho student murders, a case that shocked the nation and put advanced forensic techniques, especially genetic genealogy, right in the spotlight.
I remember when I first heard about this case, I couldn't look away from the science part. Genetic genealogy felt like something out of a detective novel. But it's very real. It's where investigators use DNA from a crime scene and compare it to public or commercial family tree databases to find relatives, then work backward to a suspect. It showed how technology can bring answers, while also raising questions about privacy and process.
All right, let's set the stage. Moscow, Idaho, early morning of November 2022. 4 University of Idaho students were found fatally stabbed in their off-campus house. Their names matter here. Madison Mogan and Kaylee Goncalves, both 21, close friends who were on the top floor, and Ethan Chapin, 20, and Xana Kernodle, 20, who were on the second floor. 2 other roommates survived on the lower floors. For a town that hadn't seen a homicide since 2015, this was beyond rare. It rattled the whole community.
The house itself is a big piece of the story. 3 stories, 6 bedrooms with entrances on the first and second floors because it's on a hillside. Madison and Kaylee were on the 3rd floor. Xana's room, where Ethan was staying that night, was on the 2nd. Dylan Mortensen had another 2nd floor room, and Bethany Funke lived on the 1st floor. That split layout helps explain how someone could move through without everyone immediately realizing what was happening.
The person ultimately identified as a suspect was Brian Koberger. He was a Washington State University criminology PhD student living in Pullman, Washington, which is right next door to Moscow. His name didn't pop up by chance. It emerged as investigators connected vehicle footage, cell data, and eventually DNA. And like you said, Leah, investigative genetic genealogy. We'll explain that in a sec, but first, timeline and context matter.
Quick definitions before we go further. First-degree murder means a willful, deliberate, and premeditated killing. Felony burglary here means unlawful entry into a building with the intent to commit a felony inside. Investigative genetic genealogy, or IgG, is that family tree DNA approach we mentioned, and CODIS is the FBI's national DNA database. If a suspect's DNA isn't in CODIS, IgG can still point to relatives by measuring shared DNA, often described in centimorgans, which is just a unit indicating how much DNA 2 people have in common.
Let's dig into the timeline leading up to the murders. On the night of November 12th into early November 2022, Madison and Kaylee were out at a local bar and later seen at a food truck. They got home around 1:56 a.m. Ethan and Xana had been at a Sigma Chi fraternity party and returned around 1:45 a.m. Everyone's movements before 4 a.m. were largely normal college weekend stuff, right?
Here's where the timestamps get sharp. Around 4 a.m., a DoorDash delivery was made to Xana. At 4:12 a.m., Xana's TikTok app shows activity. At 4:17 a.m., a nearby security camera caught sounds, whimpering, a loud thud, and the dog barking repeatedly. That audio lines up with the estimated 4 to 4:25 a.m. window when detectives believe the murders occurred.
Dylan, the second-floor roommate, later told police she heard noises and a male voice saying something like, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." She looked out and saw a masked man dressed in black walking past her and out through the second-floor sliding door. She locked herself in her room. People asked why 911 wasn't called right away. Later explanations cited shock, confusion, and belief that friends might be intoxicated. A call finally came at 11:55 a.m. after friends were summoned and pulses were checked.
When officers arrived, they found Ethan and Xana on the 2nd floor and Madison and Kaylee together in Madison's 3rd floor bed. The dog was unharmed. Authorities later said no one was gagged or restrained, and there was no sexual assault. The medical findings, shared later, noted more than 20 stab wounds for Kaylee, with additional injuries consistent with asphyxiation and blunt force trauma, and more than 50 stab wounds for Zana, many defensive. It paints a picture of intense violence and resistance.
The investigation spun up fast. The Moscow Police Department led with help from Idaho State Police and the FBI. Early on, they asked for public video, got thousands of tips, and tried to manage an avalanche of rumors online. They also initially said there might not be an ongoing community risk, then walked that back days later, which you can imagine made people nervous. Students left early for break. The whole town was on edge.
Now a crucial find at the scene. Investigators found a tan leather knife sheath on Madison's bed. They recovered DNA from it, but when they ran it through CODIS, there was no match. That's when IgG came into play. IgG compares that unknown DNA profile to profiles in genealogy databases to find relatives, then builds a family tree to find likely suspects.
Before we get to the genealogy breakthrough, there was another thread. Cameras captured a white or light Hyundai Elantra circling the neighborhood several times before 4 a.m., returning at 4:04, and then speeding away around 4:20 a.m. Police cast a super-wide net, checking records for about 22,000 Elantras from those model years. That vehicle canvas helped narrow the field and eventually pointed attention over to Pullman, Washington.
On the IgG side, an initial pass by a lab named Othram reportedly surfaced only a distant match, about 70.7 centimorgans. Think of that as a small slice of shared DNA, usually meaning a pretty distant relative. The FBI then took over and used GEDmatch and MyHeritage. Those are genealogy platforms. That step reportedly led to a closer relative around 250 centimorgans, much more informative because it suggests a nearer cousin-level connection. That helped focus the family tree building.
There's a policy wrinkle here. The FBI's use of those databases included profiles from some users who hadn't explicitly opted in for law enforcement searches, which ran against Department of Justice guidance favoring opt-in notice. Courts later allowed the defense sealed access to the IgG materials in January 2024, which shows how new this terrain still is. Privacy and procedure questions are going to keep coming up as IgG becomes more common.
Investigators were also looking at phone records. They noted that a device associated with Koberger disconnected from the Pullman network around 2:47 a.m., then reconnected near Blaine, Idaho at 4:48 a.m. The device also pinged near the victim's home around 9 a.m. that same morning, and had pinged near the house at least a dozen times between June and November 2022. Cell site data doesn't prove a person's identity, but it's another piece in the mosaic when layered with vehicle footage and DNA.
With the family tree focus in the Elantra, investigators zeroed in on Brian Koberger. He was a criminology PhD student and teaching assistant at Washington State University, and faculty had reported lit with him about conduct issues in early November, with his TA position later terminated in December 2022. That's context rather than proof, but it drew more investigative attention his way.
By late December 2022, surveillance was underway in Pennsylvania, where he had gone to his parents' home. Authorities observed him wearing surgical gloves while tossing trash and noted he'd meticulously cleaned his car. When they moved in on him in December 2022, he was reportedly wearing examination gloves and sorting trash into Ziploc baggies. Police later described finding items like a knife, a pistol, a black face mask, and ID cards during separate searches. Those details fed into probable cause narratives.
He was arrested later that month, in December 2022, in Monroe County, Pennsylvania, and charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of felony burglary. He quickly agreed to extradition, that's the legal handoff from one state to another, and was brought back to Idaho in January 2023. Early hearings handled scheduling and discovery. A Latta County grand jury indicted him in May 2023, and later that June, prosecutors announced they would seek the death penalty.
Pre-trial, the court granted a change of venue in September 2024 to Boise, with Judge Stephen Hippler presiding. A change of venue means moving a case to another place to help find an impartial jury when local publicity is intense. Meanwhile, the University of Idaho demolished the house, later opened the Vandal Healing Garden, and established scholarships honoring the victims. Those are community steps toward healing, even as legal questions continued.
In June 2025, news broke that Koberger would plead guilty to avoid the death penalty and waive future appeals. In July 2025, he entered guilty pleas to 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of felony burglary. He was sentenced later that month to 4 consecutive life sentences without parole, plus 10 years for the burglary, along with fines and restitution. That means he will remain in prison for life.
There are still side notes that people talk about. For instance, he and his father were pulled over twice for tailgating in Indiana during the cross-country drive home before the arrest. The FBI denied directing those stops. Also, the court in January 2024 granted the defense access to the sealed genealogy materials, reflecting how judges are scrutinizing IGG. And down the line, in 2026, he filed to withdraw the guilty plea, which faces steep legal hurdles given the agreement to waive appeals.
Now, a lasting debate. Was this attack targeted or more opportunistic? Early on, police said it appeared targeted but didn't specify who or what was the target. That uncertainty fueled a lot of theorizing. Leah, where do you land on that question today, given the record we've got?
Real talk, I lean toward targeted. Here's why. The device pings show prior presence near the house at least a dozen times between June and November, which suggests familiarity with that specific area. The house layout could be confusing to a stranger, but there are signs of a path in and out via the second-floor sliding door, which implies someone who scouted or at least observed. Also, the sheer closeness of those third-floor victims, Madison and Kaylee together in the same bed, and the knife sheath left on that bed, make me wonder if the upper floor was a focus. I'm not saying we have a perfect motive spelled out, but the pattern feels more planned than random to me.
I hear that. I kind of see it differently, or at least I keep some space for opportunism. We don't have a publicly articulated motive. The victims had different routines that night, and the attack window falls right after a delivery and app activity. That could mean the timing was driven by opportunity rather than a particular person. The device being in the area before could indicate familiarity, but college neighborhoods are busy, and Pullman to Moscow is a short hop. Without a clear motive, I keep wondering if the target was the house rather than a specific person, or if the plan was loose and the choices were made in real time.
That's fair. Can I ask why the genealogical piece doesn't push you more firmly toward planning? I mean, if someone's cautious enough to clean a car thoroughly and wear gloves with trash later, doesn't that suggest a mindset that plans ahead?
Good question. I think the post-crime behaviors we know about from late December could show learning after the fact. People adapt when they feel watched. Planning and opportunism can coexist. Someone could plan a late-night entry and still make choices on the fly once inside. And since prosecutors pursued a convergence case, vehicle, cell data, DNA, without publicly staking out a motive, I'm cautious about asserting a specific target. I guess I land on planned entry, but the precise victim selection could have been more fluid.
That's a solid point. And honestly, the court's move to let the defense review sealed IGG materials hints at how even the process details remain under a microscope. When we don't see those full trees and thresholds, it's wise to keep some humility about conclusions on motive and targeting. Still, the repeated presence near the house is the thread I can't quite let go of.
While we're on public perception, the pop culture wave kicked in too. Amazon Prime Video's 2025 series, One Night in Idaho, The College Murders, and Netflix's 2026 series, The Idaho Murders, College Nightmare, shaped how people understand the timeline, the IGG, the venue change, and the plea. These shows draw big audiences and can amplify interest, but they also condense complex court records into episodes. That's powerful, but it can leave out nuance, which is why going back to primary facts really matters.
Let's try a counterfactual. What if the knife sheath hadn't been left behind? Without that DNA sample, SCOTUS already had no hit. IGG might not even start. Then the case would lean even harder on the Elantra footage, the massive records search, and the cell history. Those are meaningful, but they don't have the same singular power as DNA to connect a person to a place at a specific time. Investigators would still have pursued vehicle registrations and phone data, sure, but the family tree shortcut might be gone.
Yeah, and without the sheath, the timeline probably stretches. The vehicle canvas of 22,000 Elantras would still happen, and the cell data could still flag suspicious patterns, but converting all that into probable cause might take a lot longer. If you also imagine no strong trace evidence from the car after that meticulous cleaning, then we could be talking about a case that lingers, with far more uncertainty. That single overlooked item on the bed turned into the linchpin that pulled the rest of the evidence into focus. Wild how that works out.
Thanks for tuning in, stay curious, and keep exploring the world around you.
Yeah, definitely stay curious. Until next time on Laid Back Learning, keep it chill.